Welcome to EPG Pathshala. In this paper, English Language Teaching, Module 1, Methods and Approaches to Language, written by myself, Dr. Neeru Tandon, I am going to discuss about English language. Now, whenever we talk about English language teaching, or rather English language, the first word that comes in the mind and people talk about it, that English is a very funny language. Why do we call it funny? The problem behind this particular language is that people, they don't have the fixed parameters. Now, just for your knowledge, that this is the only language which has no academy. Like other languages, French, German, Spanish, we have academies in those countries. But as far as English language is concerned, there is no English language academy as such. What happened in the Britain, Jonathan Swift, we all know him, that he is the writer of Gulliver's Travels, and he wanted to establish an academy, and he was successful also, but Queen Anne, who was supporting him, she died, and after her death, it was all over. Jonathan said that English is such an imperfect language that we need an academy to set certain things, because whatever perfections we are making, the thing happens that corruptions are more. So we need an academy. Later on in America also, that people tried to found an academy, but it continued for 2 years and then all gone. South Africa is the only country where we have English language academy. That is the only country where English is being spoken. Now, let us talk about English language teaching, that is popularly known as ELT. What is teaching method? Because in this paper we are talking about method and approaches of English language teaching. So when we talk about what is teaching method, teaching method is a way of teaching a language which is based on systematic principles and procedures, which is an application of views on how a language is best taught and learned. When an instructional design includes a specific level of application in terms of objectives, teacher and learner roles in classroom activities, it is referred to as a method. When a method objectives, roles for teacher and learners and guidelines for activities are predetermined. In using methods, teachers have very less flexibility. Now you can just see that there is approach. Within that approach, there is method. Within that method, we have technique. Now what are all these three things? We are just supposed to understand the relationship and the difference of these three things. When we talk about approach, it refers to theories about the nature of language and language learning that serve as the source of practices and principles in language teaching. It offers a model of language competence. When an instructional design is quite explicit at the level of theory of language and learning, but can be applied in many different ways at the level of objectives, teacher and learner roles and activities, it is usually referred to as an approach. Now see, after that approach is described, how people acquire that knowledge of the language and make a statement about conditions which will promote the successful language teaching. Here comes the role of the methods after the approach. And when we talk about approach and methods, then there comes the role of procedure and techniques. Now, in the each specific strategy that we use in the classroom, we can call it a technique. A technique cannot be prescribed. A technique is just takes the shape in the classroom itself. We can find and formulate the approach. We can pre-decide the method, but technique is one thing that takes birth in the classroom when the teacher is teaching the students, when the specific class is there with the specific problems. It is a tool that is used to obtain the immediate result. It's what really happens in the classroom in the actual teaching that we may call it a technique. Every teacher has a different technique to use. Method may be same, approach may be same, but technique will be different, teacher to teacher and class to class. These techniques must be coherent with the method and therefore they must be in harmony with the approach. So you see, this is a circle where they are entwined. A method, approach and technique all are interrelated but different also. So some techniques can be found in different methods, whereas other ones are specific to a given method. Now you see, when we talk about another word, procedure. What is that? This procedure is related with technique. It is an ordered sequence of the technique. In that particular technique, now what procedure we are going to follow? How to start, when to start, what to take first, what to take last, when to stop, when to take a pause. A procedure can be described in terms such as first you do this, then you do that. It's a lot smaller than a method, but it's a sequence of techniques. It can be understood as a set of actions, operations and strategies which have to be executed accordingly to a perception on how to obtain the expected results. In our case, in ELT, how to increase competition in a foreign language. Now you see that procedure, techniques, method, approach, they are different words. But in those words, there is a thread that is weaving them with one and linking them with the other one. So, historically saying, it is in 1963, the American applied linguist Edward Anthony, he introduced 3 levels of conceptualization and association, which he labeled approach, method and technique. So once again, quick review. Approach is the level at which assumptions and beliefs about language and language learning are described. Method, on the other hand, is an overall concept for the presentation of teaching material, which is based on the underlying approach. Method is therefore the level at which theory is put into practice and which choices are made about which skill should be taught, what is the content to be taught, and what will be the order of the presentation of that particular content. Now when we come to the technique, so at the level of technique, the actual classroom procedures are depicted. Techniques, they must also be consistent with the method and by implication with the respective approach. There is a very good book, Approaches and Methods in Language Teaching by Jake C. Richards and Theodore S. Rogers. That is the Cambridge Language Teaching Library. You can get it over there. It is available online also, and that discusses in detail about the approaches, methods and techniques of language teaching. According to Richards and Rogers, it is fundamental to distinguish between the notions of method and approach, since these two terms might get confused by readers and do not refer to exactly the same thing. First of all, it is important to distinguish between approach and method and to clarify their relationship. Now, there are various methods. We can categorize them basically in 4 categories. Number 1 is structural methods, then functional methods, then we have interactive methods, and finally proprietary methods. Now when we talk about structural methods, which can easily be just distinguish between two types of methods, that is grammar translation method and the audiolingual method. Grammar translation method. This is very much just clear from the title itself that grammar translation. Two things are there in this method. How we learn the language, how we teach the language. We take help from the grammar, we take help from the translation. What to translate? In which language? Language to language, word to word, sentence to sentence, what? According to this grammar translation method, we take the help of L1. L1, the language, the mother tongue of the learner. That is just described as L1. And English as the second language can be termed as L2. So the thoughts are there, and with the help of L1, with the help of the mother tongue, the acquired language, English as the second language, is being taught to the learners. That is the base area of the grammar translation method. It was assumed that the process of second language learning must be deductive and it must be carried out with constant reference to the learner's native language. A typical lesson consists of the presentation of a grammatical rule, a study of list of vocabulary, and a translation exercise was used in this method extensively. What was the objectives of the grammar translation method? What we want to achieve by this method? That the student should be able to read literature written in the other language or the target language as we call it. The second objective will be that he should be able to translate one passage in the other language, the target language. And finally, he should be developed the reading and the writing skills. So, with this method, grammar and translation, that is still it is prevalent in many areas, specifically in the rural areas where without the help of the mother tongue, the second language is not being taught. So, what are the principal characteristics? Like, classes are taught in the student's mother tongue. Vocabulary is taught in the form of isolated word list, that these are the words, okay, you just go through them. Do you know that over 2 billion words are written as far as English language is concerned? And over 1 billion people are learning English according to BBC. So, such a great number of learners and over 2 billion words, it sounds bizarre. How difficult it is. But as a student, you just carry on piling up words, mastering over vocab, and the day comes when you are ready to communicate in this target language, that is English. And once you do it, it becomes so easy. But just at the forefront, it sounds difficult. Through this method, elaborate explanations of grammar are always provided. Reading of difficult text is begun early in the course of a study. Okay, this is the rule of this thing, this is the verb, this is the noun, how you should put the sentence construction. So all rules are there. And with the rules, there are exceptions. So when the child learns, crams those rules, but the time when he is there to speak, when he is there to communicate, when he is there to write, he forgets. He forgets how to apply that. So grammar translation method, that is the weakness, that the procedural part is less. Little attention is paid to the content of the text. Often, the only drills are exercises in translating disconnected sentences. Little or no attention is given to pronunciation. So the language, we all know that there are 4 parts. LSRW. So that pronunciation part is again very, very important to give you the feel of the language. If you want to acquire the language, you should be very well aware of the nuances of the language. You should be friendly with the sounds of the language. So that is the problem with the grammar translation method when it teaches you only how to do it, how to translate it, how to just understand whatever is being said in the other language. Because of the shortcomings, people have turned to another method that is known as audio-lingual teaching method. Audio-lingual language teaching method is based on structural linguistics, that is also known as structuralism, and behavioristic psychology. And one major word attached with this is Skinner. It places great emphasis on spoken rather than written language and on the grammar of particular languages, stressing habit formation as a mode of learning. Now, again, it is different from grammar translation method entirely. How? That there the base is the mother tongue, but in audio-lingual method, no use of mother tongue is there. Pattern drilling was an essential part of the teaching technique, and the method focused mainly on the skin of listening and speaking. We all know there are 4 parts other than listening and speaking. There are reading and writing also. But reading and writing have very, very little role in this audio-lingual methodology. So the other 2 skills, they were not neglected completely, but the thrust was not on them. Now the use of language laboratory was immense. It was introduced as the teaching aid. Dialogues, rote memorization, role playing, they were the prominent activities used in this particular method. It is also known as oral method, army method, or the new method. Just look at this diagram of the audio-lingual method, which will explain all the related areas. Now, you see, you have with this teaching processes, various techniques, where's the role of the student, teacher, role, language. So everything is with the dialogue memorization. How audio-lingual method works is clear with this diagram. Now another is the functional method. Again, it has been divided into 2 different methods. One is situational language teaching method and the other is directed practice. Situational language teaching method, as the title suggests, that language teaching begins with the spoken language. Material is taught orally before it is presented in written form. The target language is the language of the classroom. Simple forms should be taught before the complex ones. Reading and writing are introduced once a sufficient lexical and grammatical basis is established. Now you see in this situational language teaching method, what is more important? Of course, the situation. So it is just based on speaking. Communication is the base. That a student should be able to speak the language first. If he is not in the condition to read or write, even then through this method, which has emphasis on speaking, the language is being taught. And after that, another method related with it is directed practice. It is that part of learning that occurs immediately after instructions. There are 2 different types of practice, directed and independent. Directed practice takes place under the watchful eyes of the teacher, instructor, classroom aide or tutor, parent, therapist, whatever you may call. The purpose of the directed practice is to ensure that the student is not learning to make errors, because at the time he is learning, his errors are being removed as they apply the concept or operation to examples which are not included in the teaching set. So it is just the aid where teacher is just using that aid and the main person is the helper over there. It is devoted to developing accuracy by systematic methods. Other methods are like interactive methods. Here we have direct method, the series method, communicative language teaching, language immersion, silent way, community language learning, suggestopedia, total physical response, and teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling. Now, one by one, let us talk about direct method first. Direct method of English language teaching is teach the language, not about the language. Just understand it again. Teach the language, not about the language. Directly come to the language. Teach the language. No need to teach the grammar first or the base first. Teach the language. And the person should be in the position to communicate after learning. No translation. No use of native language. No use of mother tongue. So, direct method, which is also known as natural method, phonetical method, anti-grammatical reform method, is applicable in various places. It is named direct. Why? Because meaning should be connected directly with the target language, without translation, no use of native language, and it was believed that language could be learnt only through demonstration, practice. Instead of explaining the grammatical rules, instead of taking help from the translation method, instead of hearing through audiolingual methods, students must be stimulated to use language logically and freely so that they just learn and bring the grammar on their own. So once again, just to repeat, what is the direct method? Do not give rules. Make them figure out the rule. Now teaching points are introduced orally. Both speech and listening comprehension are taught. Learning by self-correction. The syllabus is based on situations or topics. Contextual topical teaching is there. Correct pronunciation is emphasized. Because when you just pronounce it correctly, then the feelings are expressed. Then you can just express the thoughts in the way that you want to. So students should learn to think in the target language. It's not like the other one that you think in the native language, then translate it inside and then speak, because the process is slow that way. And the purpose of the language learning is just one, that is communication. So when you use the direct method, the communication, maybe grammatically the language is not correct absolutely in the beginning area, but using direct method, by and by you just correct yourself and get control over the language. So therefore, students need to learn how to ask questions as well as how to answer them. Next method is known as the series method. Gouin, G-O-U-I-N. Yes, Gouin was a French Latin teacher who wrote about his difficulties in learning German based on grammars and dictionaries. He wanted to learn it, and with the use of dictionaries, with the use of grammar, when he wanted to get control over the language, he felt no, this is not going to work this way. So he felt that it is applicable on other languages also. So when it comes to English language or any other particular language, he said that this method is wrong. He succeeded in learning German when he banished the grammar, when he banished the dictionaries in favor of what we would now call discovery learning. That is known as the series method of learning English language. He asked his consultants, German-speaking children, mind it, who were his consultants? From whom he learned? German-speaking children, of course. to teach him the series associated with different themes. The plant, the bird, etc. So Guin, when he was learning this language through this method with the help of the children, he found that when he banished this dictionary, use of rules, and just he was talking to children about different set of situations, and he said themes, the approach he advocated, he said that it was easier to learn the language. So it is more important to learn sentences to speak than learning words first. That verbs are the key elements in sentences, and the sentences are more easily learned when they form a narrative. What he meant by that you must have a context to learn a language. Don't just learn words and try to make sentences out of it. Just learn the words in that particular sentence, how that word, what role the word is playing in that particular sentence. That is known as the series method. We have another method known as the communicative method. Communicative method does not teach about language. Rather, it teaches language, the same thing that we discussed earlier also. It seeks to recreate real life situation, social situation, functional situation in the classroom to guide students towards communication or just having their communicative competence. The linguistic accuracy that was deemed so essential in grammar translation method or the direct method or the other approaches is a mere triviality in the communicative method. The only function is that whatever I want to convey, it should be conveyed. The speaker, what he feels should be conveyed to the listener. So that is the base aim of the communicative method. Teachers no more disturb or harass their students by demanding to be perfect in whatever they are saying, that the grammar should be perfect or the intonation should be perfect. No, the communication should be perfect. That was the main aim. Noun, verbs, direct object, they will be corrected later on. Instead, they guide them to second language proficiency by employing the 3 P's. What are these 3 P's? First is P for presentation, P for practice, and the third P stands for production. So presentation, practice, and production. Now, language immersion is a method of teaching second language in which the learner's second language, we refer it as L2. It is the medium of classroom instructions. The main purpose of this method is to foster bilingualism. What is bilingualism? That the command over 2 languages and learning the second language, taking help from the first language. So you are the person who is bilingual, can read and write and speak both the languages with command. Another way of teaching English language is the silent way. The silent way, as the name of a method of language teaching devised by Syllab Gittengo, a teacher of mathematics. Yes, he was not a language teacher. He was not the English teacher. He was the teacher of mathematics. This method shares the ground with other theories and educational philosophies. The primary precept of this theory was teaching must be subordinate to learning. The thrust area should not be teaching. Thrust area should be learning. Learner is more important. How he is learning and where he stands, how much he knows and how much more he is supposed to know. That is more important. So as it is implied in the silent method, the teacher is almost silent. Learners, they do the talking, whether right or wrong, whether just corrections are being made by themselves or they are just learning where they are wrong. So learners can be in control of what he wants to say. Mother tongue is not at all used. So just remember these three things to understand the silent way. Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I remember. Involve me and I learn. So in this silent method, learner is involved in the process of learning. He is learning by doing. So this is the silent way. Teacher is there. He is observing things, but he is not instructing after everything. So that is the silent method of teaching English language. Now, community language learning. Charles Curran developed community language learning in 1972. It dispensed with the hierarchical student-teacher relationship and adopted a counselor-client relationship. Now, teacher is the counselor and student is the client. The idea was to eliminate any sense of challenge or risk-taking from the emotionally delicate client, which theoretically would free her to learn a second language without really trying. Now in this method, that when there is a relationship of a student and teacher, now the student, if he wants to contribute something, even then, he is totally dependent upon teacher. His parameters are just set by teacher. He will not try to go beyond them. He will not try to put something on his own. But when it is just changed into client, the role of the client is different. The teacher is the counselor. Whenever client needs, counselor will help. So there is no emotional burden. Counselor would translate and gently facilitate all learning activities. We'll see that Stephen Krashen further developed this thinking during 1980s. In terms of second language acquisition, certain affective factors in the student's psyche may cause a mental block that prevents input from reaching the language acquisition device. Let us talk about one more technique known as Suggestopedia. Suggestopedia is a method developed by the Bulgarian psychiatrist educator Georgy Lozanov. It is a specific set of learning recommendations and principles of joy and easiness. Language learning should not be a burden. It should be a matter of pleasure. In this method, learners are suggested to overcome fear of uncertainty. It is the pedagogic application of suggestion and helps learn identify the hidden reserves of talent and grey regions of the mind. In this method, the learners listen to soothing music. They shall close their eyes and they are given new identities. What is the purpose of this method? Forget everything. Just be relaxed. Just be a learner. Don't be anyone else. And then try to learn something that is being taught over there. Take it completely without having any kind of bias, without having any kind of predetermined rules and regulations. Now, TPR, Total Physical Response. It is different from the previous one. How? The role is speech, action. Whatever I am saying, you just repeat it and learn it. You should be in the positive mood. Teacher plays the active and direct role. The whole sole responsibility is on the teacher, that he should teach the right thing, right method, everything. A student is just the listener and performer by imitating. Activities are used, role plays, slide shows, that whatever I am showing, just understand it. Whether understand it or not, imitate it, learn it and reproduce it. So that is TPR. Now we have seen all those approaches, methods of teaching second language learning, specifically in terms of ELT, English language teaching. Now teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling, that is also a method quite prevalent. The reading method was based on the assumption that the ability to read English is utmost important. That if I say that I know English, I can speak, but I cannot read, I cannot write. So according to this rule, this method, you are not literate. According to this rule, reading is something very, very important. If you want to have complete control over a particular language, so proficiency of reading that language, proficiency of writing that language is very, very important. Michael West, who taught English in India, argued that for Indians, the ability to read fluently in English was more important than speaking in English. The objective of the reading method was to enhance the reading skills of the learners. This method was rejected on the grounds that if the learners are taught language with emphasis on reading, they were unable to comprehend the ungraded text. Now the bilingual method. The bilingual method, it has various aspects of the direct method and some aspect of the grammar translation method. It developed an effective second language teaching method. It allows the use of mother tongue liberally, but is strictly limited to concept translation stage. This method again makes use of the traditional 3 P's I discussed: presentation, practice, and production. These main stages of any language session, like first you present the material, whatever is being taught. Then teacher and learners, they practice together, and students are expected to produce something with their new knowledge. So this way they will learn the language. Proprietary methods. Again we have 2 parts, Pimsleur method and Michael Thomas method. These methods are named on their, like Pimsleur method, it is the language learning system based on the research done by American language teacher Paul Pimsleur. It involves recorded 30-minute lessons to be done daily, with each lesson like practice, typically featuring a dialogue, revision, and new material. Students are asked to translate phrases into the target language and occasionally to respond in the target language to lines spoken in the target language by the teacher. The instruction starts in the student's language but gradually changes to the target language. Several audio programs now exist to teach various languages using the Pimsleur method. The syllabus is the same in all the languages. Michael Thomas method. It is developed by Michael Thomas, a language teacher in the USA. In this method, it is different from other methods because it doesn't take help from any listening practice, no writing, no reading also. The instruction is done entirely in the student's own language, but the answer is expected in the target language. The method focuses on constructing long sentences with correct grammar and building student confidence. So you can understand this method like the answers the instructor says in Hindi, इस पैराग्राफ को English में translate करो. But what will happen? That the student will answer in the target language. He cannot answer in the mother tongue. So that is the Michael Thomas method. After talking of various methods, let us now come to approaches. An approach is a way of looking at teaching and learning. Underlying any language teaching approach is a theoretical view of what language is and of how it can be learned. An approach gives rise to methods, the way of teaching something which use classroom activities or techniques to help learners learn. Now, structuralism as an approach. It is popular as structural linguistics. According to Longman Dictionary of Language Teaching and Applied Linguistics, structuralism is an approach to linguists which stresses the importance of language as a system and which investigates the place that linguistic units such as sounds, words, sentenced have within this system. Now, natural approach is the most popular approach of English language teaching. It was developed by Stephen Krashen and Tracy Terrell in 1983. The purpose of language is to communicate meanings and messages. It can be achieved simply by learning the lexicon of the target language. Krashen and Terrell, they felt that the initial silent period should be honored. What he wanted to convey by this thing, which silent period about which he was talking and why it should be honored. You can just understand it in the context of L1. When a small child, young child, he listens. He takes good 2 years or so after listening to speak. And how he speaks? Few words. Then try to add connectors. And after connecting, he starts making sentences. And then fluency comes. We take this process as natural process when it comes to L1, any native language, in case of child. But when the same thing happens in case of L2, second language acquisition, we are not ready to wait for that. So that is the point being made by Stephen Krashen and Tracy Terrell. They said that initial silent period when the listening part is being done, understanding part is being done, that should be honored until students begin to speak naturally. That is when speech in the target language emerges of its own accord. Textbooks are not used, and it is the teacher's responsibility to make the classroom experience enjoyable and unchallenging. In this natural approach, the teacher plays the role of actor and prop person, and students play the role of guessers and immersers. Students are encouraged to express their thoughts, opinions, and feelings in the target language. The teacher speaks only in the target language, but students are permitted to use their native language as well, but they are supposed to communicate properly. Another approach is the notional functional approach. It was developed in non-academic context. In the 60s and 70s, many European countries were experiencing an upsurge on the economic front. The migrant community of labor was in dire of local language. The conventional methods of language learning did not produce the desired outcome. So, this notional functional approach, where the only thing was to understand the language and convey and understand what the other person is saying, that was the thrust area. Now, the lexical approach in language teaching refers to one derived from the belief that the building blocks of language learning and communication are not grammar, functions, notions, or some other unit of planning and teaching, but lexics, that is, words and word combinations. This lexical approach tells us that by learning words and word sentences, only you can just grasp the language, can understand the meaning. Another approach is known as the oral approach and situational language teaching. In it, the learner has to listen and he has to repeat. The teacher has the control of the content. It means what to teach, what not to teach, what the student is supposed to repeat after him, all will be decided by teacher. Language learning becomes the habit formation. Every morning you come and say, "Good morning, teacher." Whether you understand its meaning or not, it will become your habit to say good morning, and you will learn good morning. So that is the oral approach and the situational language teaching. It is useful for beginners, but not after that. It puts emphasis on grammar and pronunciation, because oral approach cannot maintain anything without these two things. Now CLT. CLT in ELT, that is a phrase. Communicative language teaching in English language teaching. It aims to make communicative competence the goal of language teaching, and to develop procedures for the teaching of the 4 language skills, LSRW, listening, speaking, reading and writing, and thus acknowledge the interdependence of language and communication. Suppose I want to communicate. What is the first thing I need? Language. If I know the language, what I am doing with that language? I am communicating. Otherwise, what is the use of language? So, this approach tells us that language and communication, they are entwined, interdependent. Language aim is communicate, and communication needs language. So it is more an experience approach or learning by doing. So it needs contextualization, that is the social culture. Whenever you need language and communication, you should be aware of your social surroundings, you should be aware of the context or the culture of that particular area. It is learner-centered and experience-based. Meaning is paramount. Group and pair work and interaction between students makes it a successful approach. Now, cognitive code approach. This is based on Gestalt psychology and transformational grammar. It uses various sub-skills, that is listening, speaking, reading, writing, and sound discrimination. Pronunciation of specific elements, distinguishing between letters that are similar sounding in appearance or in the sound, so on. And they are learned before the student participates in real communication activities. Although research advises second language acquisition precedes second language learning, cognitive code approach emphasizes content over the form. Phonemes are learned before words, words before phrases and sentences, simple sentences before complicated ones. So what it tells, first you learn words. When you understand the word, when you understand its meaning, then learn phrases using those particular words. Now you have control over the phrases, you can use them according to the situation. Now you start using sentences with the help of the phrases, and with the sentences, now you have the authority to communicate properly. So that is again the series method. Now, comprehension approach. Suppose we read something. What is the meaning of that reading if we cannot comprehend? Comprehension, understanding of the text is very, very important. The name Comprehension Approach comes from the title of a book edited by H. Winitz, The Comprehension Approach to Foreign Language Instruction, which was published in 1981. Before learners are taught speaking, there should be a period of training in listening comprehension. First listen and then start speaking. Listening is important because by listening, you will not only be acquainted with the language, but you will train your ears to understand a particular thing. You will be just acquainted with the sounds of that particular language. Comprehension should be taught by teaching learners to understand meaning in the target language. The learner's level of comprehension should always exceed their ability to produce language. Productive language skills will emerge more naturally when learners have well-developed comprehension skills. Such an approach reflects how children learn their first language. According to Rivers, an eclectic approach allows language teachers to absorb the best techniques of all the well-known language teaching methods into their classroom procedures, using them for the purposes for which they are most appropriate. Thus, it is necessary and important because teachers faced with the daily task of helping students to learn a new language cannot afford the luxury of complete dedication to teach new method or approach that comes into vogue. So that's it. The future is always uncertain. We have seen historically that so many approaches have come forward. People, they are coming again and again with various researches. They are coming up with various notions, various approaches, various methods. And other than these methods and approaches, when the particular teaching comes, that is the thing between teacher and the student in the classroom, and then the teacher uses techniques. According to the status and the capability of the learners, there comes the complete English language teaching. He only takes help of the various methods or techniques, and in the continuation of that method or the approach, he just uses his technique to teach the learner and teaches him English language. So the future is always uncertain. However, the future of L2 English in India is quite bright, and this is the approach where the future of English lies. Thank you for visiting EPG Pathshala.